Welcome to Meaningful Conversations with Dr. L. This is a Savage Bull Entertainment production.
Hello and welcome, beautiful people and fellow night owls, to another Meaningful Conversations. I'm your host, Dr. L. I hope that you are winding down from another productive and positive day. It is National Wine Day, by the way. And even if your day was crappy or you have had a lot on your mind, I hope that after joining me in tonight's episode of Meaningful Conversations, you will feel lighter, happier, and more inspired. Meaningful Conversation is grown folks' business. It is a show that is designed to engage grown folk and adults in conversations worth having about all things social, political, health, and spiritual. The airwaves, I believe, and television channels are saturated with things that have no value to your mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. This is not one of those shows. Together, we will explore and discuss topics that help promote health and wellness and increase your knowledge, sharpen your critical analytical skills, and provide you with tools and information that I hope will help you think, be, and live better. Some topics will inspire, some topics will make you laugh, others may make you spitfire mad, and some will leave you better than when you entered the conversation. So let's settle in and get started with the show. It's still February, and it's still Black History Month. And tonight, I am so honored to have with us as a guest to talk about a really important issue, and that is mental health in the Black community. I have an amazing guest with us tonight who happens to be my day job for a boss. And also a friend. We've developed a friendship, and it's a beautiful thing when you can work for someone who you can also consider as a friend. But tonight, y'all, we're going to be joined in a few minutes by the one and only, the amazing Mr. Victor Armstrong. Now, if you don't know who he is, you need to follow him on all of his social media accounts, because he is someone certainly who's having meaningful conversations every single day about mental health and about suicide awareness. Victor Armstrong is the director of the North Carolina Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Abuse Services. He says that he is passionate about community mental health, and I have witnessed that. I've witnessed that at policymaking tables. I've witnessed that when we are engaging community members and stakeholders. He has dedicated his career to building and strengthening community resources to serve individuals living with mental illness. He is also a staunch advocate for reducing stigma around mental illness and the accompanying discrimination against people living with mental illness. He is a national and internationally known speaker and presenter on suicide awareness, particularly as it relates to underserved communities. He also utilizes his social media platform, Twitter, Facebook, and I think even Instagram, all of his social media platforms to raise awareness of these issues. He currently serves on the board of directors of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention in North Carolina, and he's a former board chair of NAMI North Carolina. He is also a member of the American Association of Suicidology and NASW North Carolina, which is the National Association of Social Workers in North Carolina. He has received numerous awards, including being this year's recipient of the Mental Health America Leadership Award. He also has received awards such as the 2019 Black Mental Health Symposium Mental Health Advocate of the Year, the 2019 Atrium Excellence in Diversity and Inclusion Award, the 2018 Distinguished Alumni Award from East Carolina University Social Work, Pride Magazine Best of the Best in 2018, and the I2I Center for Integrative Health 2018 Innovation Award for Whole Person Care, and the 2012 National Alliance on Mental Illness Professional of the Year. He is a magna cum laude graduate from North Carolina Central University, Eagle Pride, thing we share, and the university, and where he holds a bachelor's degree in business management and received a Master of Social Work degree from East Carolina University. He is a father, he is a husband, and again, he is simply an all-around amazing guy, and I'm so honored to call him not only my boss, but my friend. So welcome, Victor. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I am so glad to be here.
Well, I'm glad you are here as well. And I know the hour is late, but there are a lot of night owls up. And so
let's hope so.
Yeah, let's hope. Let's hope so. I believe so. And I want to say that Meaningful Conversations is a Savage Bull production. And also we air live. I'm home right now due to inclement weather. We couldn't get to the studio, but we air live on Oak 93.5 FM. And that station is out of Raleigh and covers pretty much the entire Wake, most of Wake, and then runs into Durham and Orange. We've been able to pick it up. So we are also airing this live via Facebook Live. And so I think there are some night owls. I know people who follow me, many of them are up, doing some stuff. So let's get started. Who is Victor Armstrong? I did your professional bio, but tell us, how do you describe? Who are you?
Wow, that's okay. So that's always a tough question for me to answer because I guess the way I look at it, we're all kind of a lot of things. So I see myself as a husband, a father. I see myself as the son of a preacher, a Black man.
Son of a preacher, man.
That's right, son of a preacher. Because when I think of who I am, I tend to think more of what is it that makes me who I am. And I think it's being all those things, realizing that no matter what decision I make or what I do in life, it impacts my wife, it impacts my children. I remember growing up, my father always telling me, you got my name, don't mess it up. So it impacts it represents my family. And then on top of all of that, I think I bring all of that to the work I do around mental health and advocacy. But I think it's because of being all those other things that I have both the passion and the support and the energy to do the things that I'm really passionate about, which is working in mental health, advocating for mental health, and trying to really to increase access to mental health services for people, and particularly for historically marginalized populations.
Great. Tell us a little bit about what inspired you to become a mental health advocate and champion, in particular for suicide awareness. I believe, so I am at the tables that I'm at, and I've chosen and have been a part of, certain types of work, and have chosen parts of my career because I'm largely driven by my upbringing and also, family members' experiences, friends' experience. So there's a personal, it's professional, but there's also a personal reason for me. So why mental health?
Yeah, I think I kind of evolved into mental health. I did not know growing up that I wanted to be in mental health, in part because I grew up in a small northeastern North Carolina town, Plymouth, North Carolina. Population of Plymouth is a little less than 4,000 people. And I didn't know about much, in terms of what I wanted to be. I knew I wanted to go to work clean and come home clean. That's about all I knew. So initially, when I went off to school, I thought I was gonna be in banking, which is really kind of where I started my career, and realized after a couple of years that that was not what I wanted to do. And I actually ended up a couple of years out of college taking a job at a social services agency just to try to have something to do until I figured out what I wanted to do. And I think once I got into that arena, I realized very quickly that human services was really where my passion was. And I always had a fascination for psychopathology and understanding how the mind works. And to be honest, I think some of that came from growing up in the church and just watching people and trying to understand, the dynamics of relationships and, why people responded to things the way that they did. And also because of my, still kind of having that drive to want to be, being able to dress up in a suit and tie and be in charge. So I thought, well, maybe I should be a DSS director. And so I went back to graduate school, got a master's degree. But when I went to graduate school to get that master's degree, it really just, I think, lit that fire in me about mental health. Like, this is where you belong. This is where your passion is. And at first it was the fascination about mental health. The more I learned about mental health, the more I began to see it as really kind of a social justice issue. I began to understand how people live with mental health challenges were impacted. But I also started to put pieces together about people I knew, people in my family, people in my hometown, people I saw in the church that I couldn't understand why they acted the way they did. And so I began to understand
now, wait a minute.
a lot of that.
You're not talking about shouting and speaking in tongues, because you need
No,
to
not talking about that. But you know how you wonder why there was always the person that just couldn't, no matter how, no matter what happened in church, they just always seemed like they were looking for something, like they just always still seemed empty. Which I can look back on a couple of people growing up, and I can see the symptoms of depression, and I remember things like when my father got called to go and minister to a family. And now I know there were things like addiction. I know now there were things like schizophrenia and things that where people were experiencing. And, we didn't know, and he didn't know how to deal with those things. And right. So I began to really look at that and start to understand those things, and really understand too how they impacted the Black community. And I actually made some friends several years ago who were suicide attempt survivors. And the more I talked with them and learned their story, and one of my good friends, Kevin Hines, he always talks about his experience. And the thing that when I first met him that has always stuck out to me, and we still talk about this sometimes, that when he Kevin Hines, for folks who don't know, at 19 years old, he jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge, attempting to kill himself. And he talks about how he knew the minute he
and how many people survived. I love it when
there's just a handful of
only a handful of people have ever
only
survived.
A handful of people have survived. And I mean there's a handful.
Right.
And but he talks about how the minute he jumped off that bridge, he knew he didn't want to die. He wanted his pain to stop, but he didn't really want to die. And I also began to think about growing up. I always heard in the church, if you die by suicide, you automatically destined for hell and things like that. But then I thought about nobody would have known if he hadn't lived. Nobody would have known what conversation he had with the Lord between the time he jumped off the bridge and the time he hit the water.
Right.
You know, nobody would know that he really didn't want to die. It was just he was in such a deep, dark place that he didn't know how to get out of.
Right.
And that became my passion, you know, just really trying to help other people understand, both so that when you see people in that place, they have empathy for them, but also to help people in that dark place to understand that you're not alone. You know, this doesn't have to be the end. There is hope and there's help, and so that's kind of how I evolved, I think, into the space that I'm in now. And then honestly, once I got into the suicide awareness space, there were not a lot of Black people that were, you know, really prominent in this space, and you know, particularly Black males. And so honestly, a lot of doors opened up for me to be able to talk to people and, you know, talk about suicide awareness and join some advocacy boards and things like that. In part because there weren't a lot of Black people that were talking about suicide awareness.
That's right. And that's why this, I think, for a whole host of reasons, this conversation is important for us to have over and over and over again about mental health in the Black community. Because in our community, as you know, it is a sort of a taboo, or has been a taboo. But
Yeah.
I really want to say thanks to you. You are doing some really, I think, innovative and transformative work through not just the work that we do every day. And I see your leadership at the state level, be right, you know, up close and personal, because I work right under you. But I'm really, really impressed by
Well, thank
the
you.
social media work that you're doing, because you're reaching people who will never reach out to the state and who don't know what we're doing. You're reaching people in barbershops and, you know, folk in the hood, in the hood, like where I come from, right?
Yeah.
And you're making it safe and cool to say, hey, you know, I'm having
Yeah.
some struggles.
You know, I'll tell you something interesting along those lines is because that, you know, that person, that's what people see now, that I'm the you know, the guy who talks about suicide and tries to normalize the conversation. There are people who will share things with me, you know, and I've had family members to share with me that, you know, I never told anybody this, but I've, you know, attempted suicide. And I've had friends to say, you know, I've just, you know, I feel like you understand. So I'll tell you that I've attempted suicide, or I've experienced depression or anxiety. And it's a whole lot more prevalent than people would think. But for Black people, especially for Black men, you know, we don't want to talk about depression. And it's really in part because, you know, I think the symptoms of depression it's hard for us to really be vulnerable anyway. But when you talk about symptoms that can make you feel like you're out of control, you're crying, you know, all the time, you're this funk, this sadness, and we've been told all our lives that we're supposed to be resilient people. You know, we're supposed to persevere, and we're told that you got to always be better. So I don't have time to you know, feel anxiety. I don't have time to feel depression, because I got to be better and I got to keep moving forward. And it's almost like we get this, you know, we have this thing instilled in us that, you know, you betray your race if you acknowledge that you have mental health challenges, and we have got to get past that.
Yeah, we got to get past it, because it's killing us, right? The
It's
silence and the
us.
holding it inside is literally and figuratively killing us. On the very first show, I actually read a few excerpts from Terry Williams' Black Pain. And amazing book, because she shared, you know, Terry Williams at one point was the go-to publicist for Black stars. And so all, you know, big names, she was their publicist and so forth. And she had a mental health break and went into mental health crisis. And she writes about that experience, lesson learned. But she did talk about this whole notion that, you know, we are told what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And we've survived slavery and just get over it. But I want to talk about that and then I'll go back to the questions that I had prepared. I want to talk a little bit about this whole notion that because you say that quote again because I messed it up in the meeting when I was trying to say it. You said something that all your stuff is great. I listen, I read it all, love it all. But this one particular thing sort of just touched me in a different kind of way.
Yeah, we had this conversation. I don't remember which one it was now.
It was the one where you said, is it that, are we?
Yeah. I said that, I often hear that Black people don't recognize the symptoms of mental health challenges, and therefore we don't seek help. But I ask, is it that we don't recognize the stressors, or is it just that we're accustomed to them, so we've
Right.
normalized them? And I think that's part of our challenge, is that hard living is just is what we know.
Right.
Experiencing challenges where you feel like you got the weight of the world on your shoulder, and everything is a fight and everything is a struggle. We're used to that.
Right.
But now the thing I do challenge people on is, when they say, we're supposed to be stronger because we have endured slavery and all these other things. And the thing I tell folks, that's got nothing to do with my kids. They don't know anything about that. They don't have that kind of perseverance.
Right.
And so
and neither do we really.
And we don't either.
And we don't either.
But I look at me, and I got 3 boys. If I grew up in tobacco fields. If I put any one of my 3 boys in the tobacco field, they would think I had lost my mind.
Right.
And
Look, I got bougie. Look, there are some of us that made it out of poverty and so forth and so on. And then there's some of us and I have family members all across the socioeconomic strata. But I can tell you, the most bougie of them all are the ones that are at the low end. and even them, they're like, look, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not. So yeah.
But that kind of thinking, it puts an unfair burden on our kids too, because they have all these pressures and challenges and different kinds of challenges than what we had, because they're exposed to social media, and the same way that we say racism has always been here, but now we have cell phones and we have cameras, and so we capture all of it. Well, that means they're also seeing and having a steady diet fed to them of police violence against Black men. Seeing what happened to Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd. So they see all that stuff, but yet we tell them, oh, you don't have time to be depressed. You don't have time to to get into your feelings, because you just got to keep pushing.
Right.
But it's a different generation, and I think that's part of the reason why young Black males have the highest, or have the suicide rate among young Black males is increasing faster than any other demographic, and I think that's part of the challenge. Yeah. And we saw a 20-year span up until about late 90s, I think, where the suicide rate for African American youth increased by over 200%. So there's this steady growth and increase in rates of suicide. And I tell Black men all the time, we talk about all the things that kill Black people, especially Black men.
Right.
We'll talk about high blood pressure, diabetes. We'll talk about police violence. We'll talk about Black on Black crime, but we don't talk about suicide. Suicide is taking us out too. And so we need to be talking about those things.
We do need to. And there are some researchers who believe that some of the death by cop killings are suicide by cops, right? So there's that thing. So let's get into this question here. What are the most urgent issues facing the Black community today when we think about our mental health? You know that What's Eating, there was a movie, something great.
Gilbert Grape.
Gilbert Grape, right? So what's eating eating the Black community?
So I think it's a combination of a couple of things. One is I do think stigma is a huge issue for us, and we've got to deal with that. But I'm also while I talk about that, I'm always cognizant of the fact that we cannot always blame the victim. And in many ways, the Black community has been the victim of these health disparities, which are included in mental health. So part of it, I do think that we've got to figure out how do we normalize the conversations in our community. But at the same time, when we look at the fact that, African Americans are 20% more likely to report psychological stressors, but less likely to initiate treatment, more likely to terminate treatment. Well, part of that is because none of the treatment is in our communities.
Right.
And if you got to take 3 buses to get to an appointment, you're less likely to go, and you're certainly not going to get there. And then when you get there, you don't see anybody who looks like you.
That's right.
And I was sharing with a group earlier this week. It would be hard for me to go into the office of a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, 20-something-year-old white female therapist, no matter how talented she is.
That's right.
Say to her, I feel like, I don't feel like getting out of bed in the morning. I cry all the time. My sex drive is low.
Right.
That's not a conversation I'm going to have. And if I have that conversation with her, I'm not coming back because I'm going to be too embarrassed to face her again.
Right.
So we.
Then you go run into it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Right. So part of the challenge is the system's not built for us. There's 4% of psychologists are Black, 2% of psychiatrists. So we don't have enough clinicians that look like us. The treatment models that we use in behavioral health are really based off of models that were developed from the perspective of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males that do not take into account the nuances of race and culture. So part of what we've got to do is we have got to create resources that speak to the Black experience. For the providers that we have who are not providers of color, we have got to educate them. And I didn't get any of this when I was in graduate school on my MSW, but we got to teach people about complex trauma experienced by Black people and brown people. And so that's part of our challenge is that we've got to do some work internally, but the system has got to do some work to catch up also.
That's right.
I shared this with people that, when people start talking about how Black men don't want therapy, first of all, I tell them, I don't really buy that. It's not that we don't want therapy. We want therapy that speaks to us, our challenges, our needs. But if I could be hungry and you can invite me over for dinner.
Yeah.
But if you're serving okra, I don't eat okra. Don't like it, can't swallow it, not going to eat it. I'm going to go someplace where I can get something that I can eat, that I can digest, that I can enjoy. And I ain't coming back to your house for dinner.
That's right.
And so that's why you see a lot of Black folk won't go to therapy because they don't really talk to us. They speak from a model that doesn't speak to us. We'll go to the church. We'll go talk to the pastor.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Because when we go to the pastor, some pastors say, "Oh Lord, just pray about it. It's going, or it's all in your head," right? So talk about the role, and you wrote a piece, you wrote an article that speaks to this. So talk about. I'm sliding. I don't know. I need to put stoppers on my.
Are you on wheels?
Yeah, I'm on wheels, and I was like sliding away. But so let's talk about that. The role of the church.
Yeah.
What the role of the church in the Black community is so powerful.
Yeah. It
and
is.
I had the article. I was gonna pull it up.
Look, I was socialized in the church.
Right.
That's where I grew up. In the church, in the Black community, that's been where we've gone for our social services. That's been where we've gone for our counseling. That's been, we many of us grew up in the church. The church has always been the gateway to the community. So the church was the way into the community, but the church was also the entity that allowed other folks outside the church to understand what was important to us.
Right.
Politicians want to get elected, they need to come to the church and show their face.
That's right.
Because whoever, the church let folks know who we support and what we supported. So I think there's definitely a role for the church to play in raising awareness about mental health challenges and suicide. The problem is that a couple of things. Historically, the church has done some damage because the church has, the Black church has historically said you need to pray harder. Mental health, anxiety, depression are signs of moral and spiritual weakness, and really have not had empathy for folks or families that were going through mental health challenges. So we got to fix some of that. And I think we're getting better. because I think we are starting to have more of those conversations, but there are some challenges. Number one, in the rural community, like my father was a pastor for 48 years. My father had a high school education, so he was mostly either self-taught or learned under the mentorship of older preachers.
Right.
You know, he didn't go to school for
seminary,
counseling.
divinity,
Yeah,
Duke
he didn't do all
Divinity
that
School
stuff.
or Harvard Divinity School.
Yeah, and in rural communities, you still see a lot of that. So there's still those challenges there. The other challenge I think that the church has is that, and I've seen this firsthand, a lot of pastors haven't dealt with their own trauma yet.
Right.
And so, you know, when you start talking about what can cause suicide or what can cause depression or anxiety, and some of it is the impact of trauma, then you lose some preachers right there because you're stepping on their toes. You're getting too close to home because they haven't dealt with their trauma. And you know, especially when we start talking about child abuse,
right?
You know, folks don't want to get into that because, you know, again, truth be told, there's some folk in the church that really were abused. You know, our grandparents and parents did the best they could.
Right.
But, you know, hitting somebody in the head with a broom handle.
Or beating them with an extension cord or something, right? People talk about that.
Yeah, it's not healthy. I'm not going to say it was wrong, but it wasn't healthy.
Right, it wasn't healthy.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, and so we got to get past those things. But I think where the church...
and the other side of it, some not discipline, right? Some people have grown up with trauma of not knowing boundaries. And,
right.
You know, so...
But I think what the church can do is, you know, first of all, I think the church is a place to normalize the conversation. So I think that you know, preachers I think need to talk about it from the pulpit. I think that when churches start planning out their calendars for the year, they need to plan mental health and a mental health Sunday. And when you have your health fairs, you make sure mental health is included. You know, you need to reach out to resources in the community, invite them to come to your church and share. And you need to be able to connect people to those resources. You know, when somebody comes to the preacher and says, well, I hear they come to the preacher and say they got, you know, high blood pressure, you send them to the doctor, but, you know, he might lay hands on them.
Right, I was going to say, some of them might pull out a little Norton oil.
Yeah. Do that.
Yeah, do that too.
But then let them go to the doctor. And I think, you know, the same way with mental health challenges, you know, it's got to be, you know, pray to the Lord, you know.
But do the work.
The pastor lay hands on you, do all of that, but go seek professional help along with it. And I tell people too, if your church tells you that your mental health challenges are because you don't pray enough or because you are morally or spiritually weak, that church is not prepared for you, and you need to find another place to go. Because that one is not the one for you, because they're not ready for what you bring to the table. And you know, I try to encourage people to look at their mental health as your health. It's your health.
That's right.
And so you gotta fight and advocate for what you need. And if your church, I don't care how long you've been, if they got a pew with your grandmama's name on it, doesn't mean that you're supposed to be there.
Right. That's right. So, Lucille Clifton said that I'm amazed that something has tried to kill me every day and has failed, right? Something to that effect. And we over the last, you know, our history period is filled with trauma and traumatic events and things that have tried to kill us. And in recent, you know, the killing of George Floyd and Tamir Rice and Eric Garner and Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown and Sonia Bland and Breonna Taylor, all, you know, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Our community, it has been traumatized. So let's talk about trauma and how it manifests, and then also trauma-informed care as a way to respond to some of that trauma.
Yeah, Black folk, I mean, we are in and of itself a study in trauma, because, you know, not only do we, many of us experience trauma to some extent, to higher levels than other populations do. Because when you look at Black folk, that we are predominantly, disproportionately living in poverty, disproportionately incarcerated, disproportionately stopped by the police.
We're the lower caste. We
We
are
are
the
the lower
lowest
caste, right? We are
the
the lower
lowest.
caste.
Right.
And so you've got those things every day. And then we got the microaggressions that we deal with in the workplace.
Lord, yes.
And so you got those things going, and you got this constant barrage of external information telling you that what you see and what you know is not real. When America's not racist. There was no racism in that. You reading too much into that, and so we're having to process that, over and over and over. But then we've also had this history of trauma, generation after generation after generation, that's been passed down to us, and then we wonder why the life expectancy of African Americans is so much lower than other races. But in part, it's because of this complex trauma that's been handed down generation to generation to generation. And we've gotten to a place where, for some of us, we have just normalized it, and then others, it's a constant fight against it. Either one is not healthy. Being in a constant state of fight or flight is not healthy. And in many ways, that is the life of, a Black person in America. I have to be, and I hear people say, you hear white people say, well, I don't see color. Well, if you don't see color, then, you don't legitimize my story, because I have to see color everywhere I go.
Right, right.
And I have to remember, no matter where I am, that I'm a Black man, and that says something to people.
Right.
And so that in and of itself, carrying
I'm a
that
little conceited
day.
about it. I'm like, what you mean? Black is beautiful.
Yeah.
What? You don't.
Well, I did do a post one time that said, if you don't see color, that's your loss, because I'm beautiful.
Right.
See me, just don't judge me.
That's right. That's right.
But I don't think people realize either how ignorant that statement is.
That's right.
Because what you do when you say I don't see color, you're telling me that everything I experience every day because of my color,
right,
is not real.
That's
right. And that again is traumatizing. So, so we live with both that complex trauma, and then that that daily trauma that we experience every day.
And it's so deep. Some of it, as Black mothers, it's traumatizing just sending your child out of the house. That is a form of, thinking, oh my gosh, it doesn't matter who they are. They can come from,
right,
a neighborhood, a public subsidized neighborhood, or from behind a gated community.
Right.
And because of the color of their skin, they can be killed in the streets by those that we pay through taxpayers' dollars to protect them. Right?
And you look, and then you look at how not only has it been normalized by people that we come in contact with every day, but the media has normalized it.
That's right. That's right.
It's only been, the George Floyd thing was like all of a sudden, the media woke up.
Right.
But Black folk have been portrayed as dangerous in the media for years.
Right.
News would always lead off with something that some Black person did, when there are more white people that commit crimes than Blacks, even though Blacks can get double the sentence of somebody white. There's more white people that commit crimes than Black. And even for the Blacks, when you look at the crime rate, people forget that crime rate is a measure of crimes reported, not crimes committed.
That's right.
There's a whole lot of white folk committing crime.
Karens.
Karen
got off, by the way. Karen's charges were dropped.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
God.
She took a class.
Right. I was like,
Yeah.
Right. Can you let some of the brothers out and sisters from marijuana, those things?
Yeah.
If we're being generous with time and charges, oh gosh. Yeah. But anyway.
But all we see all of that. It's just like when and it's kind of funny, but I remember when Donald Trump first started talking about the fake news.
Right.
And I was working at Atrium Health then, and one of the he was our chief medical officer at the time. He's a guy that's a really good friend of mine. I have a lot of respect for him. And he's doing amazing work now around diversity, equity, and inclusion, in part because of some of the stuff that he and I did together when I was at Atrium. But I remember, him coming in my office and saying, he was talking about, Trump talking about all this fake news, and the media and reporters are kind of our, they're the ones that are our beacons of truth, because they got to print the news. And I said, well, I'm not defending Trump by any stretch of the imagination, but
right.
Black folk have always known the news was fake,
right?
Because it always portrayed us as something that we were not,
right?
So I don't have sympathy either when he started calling the media fake, because you've been fake on us for years,
a long time, right?
But we've had to live with that. But then, a lot of what I think Trump did tonight, and I know this conversation wasn't going to be about him, but it has always been us and them. Mm-hmm. He just drew the line differently, and pushed some folk that looked like him out of the circle if they didn't agree with him. But we've always been on the outside looking in.
That's right, and we've always been portrayed, and our story has always been told by others from the pathology. It's always been, it is, and that has created the narrative that allows others to see us that way, because it's the dominant narrative that gets the airwaves and the coverage. We've always been portrayed by our weaknesses or the pathologies, by slavery, not the inventions, not the liberators, not the Harriets, not the, and I think that carries over even into the way our kids are treated, right?
But you even look at, what happened with Mike Brown, and so many different cases. It's always that, something horrific might have happened to him, but he did something to cause it. He did something, he was guilty of something else.
Or even George Floyd, they were trying to say he passed off a counterfeit $20 bill. Always an excuse.
You can't just be, we can't just be that this was an injustice and we're victimized. It's always, he did something.
Which is why America has not healed yet from racism, because of those convenient excuses and rationales that white America comes up with to justify how they respond. And I know we weren't going into the political part of it, but this is part of our social,
and part of the challenge too with the racism piece though is, and I posted this on social media a while back too, kind of halfway joking. Most folks got it, some did not. But I had posted something, several months ago that said, to my white friends, your credibility in defining what is and is not racist, has proven to be suspect. So we're gonna pull your race grading card, because what white folks tend to do is they will label racism. For them to be labeled racist, it has to be, using the N-word. It has to be
wearing a sheet and a hood.
But they don't realize that just by virtue of your access to power and your willingness to have that access to power, that is what racism is. Racism is a construct that's all about power and access to power, and for them to realize that, all the benefits you have, you get a lot of those benefits at the expense of Black folks who didn't get it. Right. You may have gotten, you got generational wealth that may have been handed down to you because we couldn't compete for the job. My parents couldn't compete for the job that your parents competed for. And
even if you didn't have generational wealth, because we also get the other side. Well, I wasn't born with a silver spoon. I was born in poverty too. Yeah. White skin gives you a currency. That's right. Currency that moves you to the head of the line above Black folk every single time, no matter what their status or station is. Let's go into, I want to talk about suicide a little bit, because, that my family's been impacted by it. And you say that suicide is not an illness.
Right.
And that is a
Yeah.
misperception, right? People,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
say, what is suicide? And talk about it from the perspective of, what's eating guilt with great, but what
Yeah.
you've mentioned some of the statistics
Yeah.
about Black kids, the youth, but adults are as well, right?
Right.
And talk to us a little bit about
So
suicide.
suicide is not in and of itself. It is not a disease. It is the worst possible outcome of the culmination of a lot of very complex issues, and often there may be a mental health component to this. So for a lot of folks um, who die by suicide, there is an element of depression or anxiety. So there's often some mental illness attached to it, but it is not getting treatment for those other ailments or things that you are exposed to that you emotionally and mentally can't handle, that can drive you to that place of attempting suicide. And I think for young Black males, part of what I think is happening is, I just think there's so much that young Black males have to endure, in part seeing how they are viewed by society as a whole, and their self-worth, that I think for them there is a sense, or can be a sense, of hopelessness. I think for a lot of people who, even when you look at, and I know we had a question on a panel on yesterday about veterans. I think some of that is true for veterans. I think part of it is veterans many of them have seen a lot of things that are traumatic. They don't know what to do with those things. They don't know how to process those things. But oftentimes they also don't get the kind of help they need to help them process those things, because of the stigma attached to suicide, and because they have been taught they're supposed to be strong and they're supposed to persevere. But I think, again, for Black people, I think part of what has to happen is we've got to have access to treatment earlier. We got to have access to treatment that speaks to our complex trauma. We got to have access to that treatment in ways that we can access it. I say all the time that, and I think this is sometimes where white folks even can well-intentioned white people can be misguided. Increasing access doesn't necessarily increase access for us. So if you put more out there, it still doesn't mean that it's going to be put out there in ways that Black people can access it.
Right.
So I think we've got to look at how do we create more treatment that speaks to our life experience and the challenges that we face. But I think in as a whole, I think the things that we need to do as a society to combat suicide, one is, I think we do have to normalize the conversation. We got to help people to understand suicide is real. Suicide happens more often than you think. And so you've got to be willing to talk about it. And then we've got to create more safe space for people to have those kinds of conversations. That's one of the things I share with parents about their kids. Listen to them, non-judgmentally, encourage them to share their feelings, and then don't tell them they're wrong for their feelings. Try to help them process those feelings. And if you feel like they need professional help, then, seek out that professional help. Same thing for men. And I tell men all the time, I tell, couples all the time, you've got to have safe space. If I can't if I can be vulnerable in my home, if I can't tell my wife that I'm hurting, I'm not going to tell anybody else. And so I try to encourage folks to, create that safe space with people that you care about, so that you can be vulnerable, so that they can be vulnerable, so that if either of you is struggling, you don't have to go through it alone. Right. You have someone you can share that burden with.
Excellent. So we have a few more minutes. We've got right at 5 minutes before we say
time flew by.
I know, right? All right. So how do we become mentally healthy given the socio-political challenges that we face in the Black community? And I wanted us to get to some stigma stuff, but we did. I
Yeah,
think we wove it in.
yeah, yeah. Well,
But
yeah,
how
we
do we
got.
get healthy? Where do we go from here? Where do people take from this? How can we
Yeah.
get
One,
healthy?
I do think that we need to change some of the wording, like, and I like that you said mentally healthy, because I think that, um, I seldom use the term mental illness. I use the term mental health challenges. And when I talk to folk, particularly folks in the church, I talk about mental wellness. We got to focus on mental wellness because mental
Mm,
illness also implies that you're already sick. So I think part of what we have to do is we have to get upstream, and that involves self-care. So we've got to take time to take care of ourselves. That means, having some time, whatever works for you. If it's meditation, if it's prayer, focus on whatever gives you strength. Realize that when we experience things like the things that we saw last summer, any kind of traumatic event, it affects you mentally, spiritually, physically, emotionally, and behaviorally. So you got to be able to do things that minister to all those parts of yourself and recognize you're going to be impacted in all those ways and try to find ways, self-care that does speak to you mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, and behaviorally, and do things that they help you to deal with that, work with that. And then I think collectively, again, I think there are things that the church can do. I think there are things that we can do to support one another. I make a habit of little things like, I make a habit of at least once a week, I will reach out to friends and just check on them. I also, just a few weeks ago, I hosted a Zoom virtual class reunion for some of my folks in my class. And that was because I know people feel out of touch and isolated. So I think, those kind of things we can do. So, I think that there's self-care, there's raising awareness, but there's also that we got to take care of each other. We got to look out for each other.
absolutely. We're gonna have to have you on again. I do want to leave some time. It is streaming live on Facebook. If there are any questions that anyone wants to ask, drop them I'm on my Facebook page now. If there are any questions, please drop them in to the Facebook Live comment section if there are any questions that you want to ask. And while we are waiting, what's the message you would give to your younger self, to a young Victor running around in the country?
Oh, yeah. I wish if I know you're going to ask me that. I've had some things because sometimes I've sitting down and written letters to my younger self.
Oh, wow.
And
Oh, wow.
and usually it's something like you're going to be challenged. You are going to both experience pain and joy. You're going to find friendship in places that you would not have thought you'd find friendship, or you're going to find hurt in places you would not have thought you'd found hurt.
Mm.
But through it all, you're going to discover that you were built to take all of this. And not only were you built to take everything that comes at you, but you were built to carry other people's burdens along with your own. And that's what makes you who you are.
Amazing. That's beautiful. What gives you hope?
That's interesting because there's some days hope seems further and further away. But I think what gives me hope is just knowing that I always feel like I have the power to decide what happens to me. I've got the power to decide. Even when things are out of my control, in my mind, I've changed the rules, and somehow I end up being in control, at least in my head. Because one thing I do know is that I can always walk away. So
That's right.
So I think that's what gives me hope, is knowing that at the end of the day, God's got the final say in what happens to me.
Yeah.
And I got the final say in what I do about it. So that always gives me hope, because there's always an answer. I've been in some pretty tight spots, but there's always an answer.
Yeah. Same here. Same here. I love that, and sometimes, it gets a little little scary, but
You know what? But look, I'm gonna tell you this, and this kind of to the, what gives me hope. Who is Victor Armstrong? All that kind of stuff. Part of the way that I navigate life is anything I do is something I do until I don't want to do it anymore. And so I'm not gonna get stressed out about a job. If it gets to the point where it's more than I want to do, I can always do something else or not. But
what's your sign, Victor?
Capricorn. But
well, I'm a Gemini, and I do believe there's something. People say don't follow astrology and all that, but I say, weren't the wise men told to follow the astrology or whatever? But no, so you're a Capricorn.
I don't really follow the zodiac.
I don't either, but I that's why I was joking about it. But you are very even keeled. Like you're just that's my thing. That's why I'm gonna live to be 100 and have all my teeth when I get there. I don't know about that. My great grandma lived to be 102 and I lived 105, and they weren't really hell raisers. They were some cool ladies, fierce and feisty. But they still and dip snuff, one of them to snuff. And then I was told Aunt Lulu smoked cigarettes for 40 years before she quit, and still lived to be 105. That was in my days when I loved to smoke Virginia Slim, Super Slim menthols. But anyway, it has been a pleasure having you on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm going to have you back because this is a conversation that we must continue to have. People find help, find resources that speak to you and to who you are, that are culturally relevant. And, you can always contact us at the State Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities and Substance Abuse Services to get assistance on locating and getting access and connected to services. But I first want you to, consult. We have what's called LMEs and MCOs in North Carolina for right now, and reach out locally, try and find support and find a support system, and then hope for NC. What's the number?
855-587-3463.
That's right. So call over NC helpline. And I want to leave you. This is Black History Month, and last week we had a great friend of mine, Freedom Clay, who I'm still getting a lot of feedback on. His artwork is phenomenal. But I love artists. I wanted to be an actress right out of high school. And my mother was like, "You've lost your mind if you think you're gonna run off to New York." And I so wish I had. I swear we probably would have been millionaires by now. But Lucille Clifton, won't you celebrate with me? Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model, born in Babylon, both non-white and woman. What did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay. My own hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. I think that is truly a poem that speaks to the Black experience in America. And my brother, I am so grateful for you. Thank you. Keep doing the great work you're doing. I salute you in everything that you do. And Steve, take us out. Okay.
Thank you.
I loved it. Enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right. Talk to you tomorrow.
All right.